Thanks for downloading the Racing Postcast. Listen online and on mobile.
Hello, the Bloodstock team have taken over the Racing Post studios for a special postcast on the pedigrees of the Guineas contenders at the weekend. I'm Martin Stevens, my colleague James Thomas is here, and we have a special guest in Bloodstock agent Ed Sackville. Hello, Ed.
Hi there.
And Ed has a special insight on the Guineas because he bought a 1,000 Guineas winner a few years ago, Sky Lantern. How's Sky Lantern doing, Ed?
She's very well. I saw her yesterday. She is safely in foal to Frankel. So next year she'll have a Frankel foal on the ground. As well as that, she has a Derbawi colt foal at foot, and she also has a Derbawi colt yearling.
And is it the plan that Ben Keswick, who owned Sky Lantern, is he going to race the progeny, do you think?
I think it'll be very, very unlikely if he ever sold the progeny. I think Sky Lantern is the apple of his eye, and he has a massive emotional attachment to the mare, and obviously we would love to have a filly at some point so that we can then breed from them. But I must admit, I'd be surprised if the progeny was ever sold.
Now, James, in tomorrow's paper on Thursday, is writing an article about how Guineas winners are bought. Do you have any questions for Ed on how he picked Sky Lantern?
Well, I mean, when you attend the yearling sales, are you a buyer that likes to go on pedigree, or are you a type person, or what is it that you go to the sales looking for?
I think the most important thing is the physical specimen in front of you. But pedigree obviously does play a large part, but I don't care how well bred you are if physically you aren't a good specimen. I wouldn't give you so much of a chance. I would much prefer to have a very good-looking physical, and obviously if there is a nice pedigree to back it up, that is a big help. In an ideal world, you would have both of them.
Sure. And what kind of physical traits is it that you look for? Is it a good walk? I know people talk about, horses' heads, kind eyes, that sort of thing. Shape, size. What gives a few things that you particularly are a fan of in a horse?
I think the walk is very important. You want a horse which is a nice, easy mover. And then overall, you just want a horse who looks like an athlete. I think it's important for a horse to have a good hind leg, good shape to it, a horse with good bone. It's really the overall outlook, which is the most important thing. I was always taught to look at the tree first, and then look at the leaves later. So I think the most important thing is that the horse is a nice physical, and then you probably can forgive anything in moderation.
Richard Hannon said she has big ears. Is that something you believe in?
I'm always told that horses with big ears are meant to be very honest and genuine. I've always been told that. I must admit, I didn't buy her purely based on her ears. But I'm sure the ears came into my buying decision.
You might have given an extra 5,000 maybe.
Exactly, just a bit.
Back to this year's races. Churchill looks the star of the show potentially on Saturday, and he seems to have cast iron claims on form and a very good pedigree. Although he's by Galileo, sire of 2 winners so far, Frankel and Glen Eagles. Frankel's also appeared in about 5 of the last 6 2,000 Guineas winners' pedigrees, either as dam sire or as grandsire or just as sire. But he's from a very speedy family. Does he look like a Guineas winner on paper?
I mean, on paper, of course, he looks like a Guineas winner. He was a dual Group 1 winning 2-year-old. He won the Dewhurst, which I think is crucial. It shows that the horse goes at Newmarket. Newmarket is, to an extent, quite a specialist track. He has outstanding juvenile form. He is by Galileo, the best stallion in the world. He has a lovely female pedigree. His dam was a stakes winner, and she was also second in the Queen Mary. Galileo seems to do incredibly well with speedy mares. Churchill's second dam was Airwave. She was the champion 2-year-old filly. She won the Cheveley Park. She was a Group 1 winner. It's a very, very nice page. I mean, quite simply, he has to have every chance. Obviously, we won't find out until the day, because the plan is for him to go straight to the Guineas. But this is something which Aidan O'Brien has done in the past, and has done very successfully in not giving a horse a prep race.
I suppose if you were looking for faults, you would say that he comes from a very, very fast female line, which with other stallions' progeny may sort of dissuade you a little bit. With Galileo, it doesn't seem to hold him back at all, does it? And, obviously he's worked well with Stormcat mares in the past, and as Ed, you said there, he's got his record with speedy mares is second to none.
I would say
sort of stretching them out.
I would say that it's probably Churchill's biggest asset is the fact that he's from he's out of a fast mare and from a fast family, because if you look at the kind of mares Coolmore have been buying for Galileo, the likes of, say, Tiggy Wiggy, for example, they know the stallion better than anyone, and they obviously think that the fast mares suit him, which clearly they do.
It is interesting, though, that Galileo does nick so well with these fast mares, and Frankel and Glen Eagles are both out fast mares, but this family is particularly speedy. I think Meow the first dam, Airwave the second dam, Cangrog Valley the third dam, and going back to the fourth and fifth dams, they all won over the minimum trip. And there's also, older listeners might remember Clantimer in the 1980s was a real specialist over 5 furlongs. It's a really, really, really fast family. But that said, the influence of Galileo should lift up the how far you'd expect.
You have to remember that the horse has already won the Dewhurst over 7 furlongs as a 2-year-old. So I think, frankly, a year later, well, not a year later, but when he is a year older, an extra furlong is not going to be any trouble. I can't believe if I would be surprised if Churchill, if he was beaten, I'd be surprised if the reason was that he didn't stay.
What about? Sorry, go on.
I was going to say one thing we touched on earlier was physical aspects to horses. Obviously, last year Churchill was a very big 2-year-old. In most of his races he dwarfed all his opponents. Do you think there's an argument to say that the other 3-year-olds this year will have caught up with him, or do you think he'll have benefited equally from another sort of winter off and could have developed even further?
I mean, it's really impossible to say until you see the horses walking around the paddock. And I remember when they were walking around the paddock a few years ago, and I saw Henry the Navigator, I actually remember thinking he was a rather disappointing-looking horse and hadn't developed. And 5 minutes later, I felt very stupid.
And what about going back to the pedigree? So, say Churchill wins at the weekend and wins well, would you start to doubt the pedigree then if he went up to 10 furlongs? Do you think he could be a Derby horse with that very fast maternal pedigree? I
mean, again, it entirely depends on if he were to win, how he won, whether he looked like he was the further away, the further he went, the further clear he was going. I think I totally appreciate your point in saying whether would the horse get the Derby distance with that very fast female family, but I think the bottom line is that Galileo is so extraordinary in what he achieves as a stallion that, frankly, I wouldn't rule anything out. I mean, a Derby or a July Cup, I mean, the stallion is brilliant.
And actually, I think Cape Blanco is out with a very, very fast mare as well, from a very fast family, and he obviously won the Irish Derby, so it's been done before. Galileo, do you think he's the best sire of your lifetime?
Yeah, yes, certainly at the moment. But then, I mean, I think that obviously Sadler's Wells was brilliant. And Galileo, at the moment, he's certainly the standout. But let's not forget the likes of Dubawi is an incredibly good stallion. He's a very good stallion in his own right, and is doing better and better and better. And another stallion who looks like he could emerge is Frankel, who I think has got 2 runners, Eminent and Dream Castle, in the race.
Yeah, I was going to go to Barney Roy next, but if you're going to jump ahead, then
I thought I did that rather smoothly, the way I sort of connected it all in.
Okay, go to Eminent then. From the flying first crop of Frankel, won the Craven Stakes well. Was that a slightly messy race? Do you believe the form of the Craven?
I mean, as we've seen in recent years, the Craven hasn't got a brilliant record of producing the Guineas winner, but then again, Eminent's only running 1 renewal of the Craven, so it would be unfair to tar him with the brush of other horses. I mean, he looked something special when he won his maiden in Newmarket. He certainly didn't do anything in the Craven that would, impinge on that view that he created on debut, and I think he has to go there with every chance, really. I mean, we talk about a speedy female family for Churchill. I think Eminent's a colt who's almost certainly going to stay further than a mile in time, but the way he travelled, the way he finished his race off in the Craven, I don't think the mile in the Guineas is going to be any hindrance to him at this stage in his career.
Yeah, interesting about Eminent was it was one of the cheaper Frankels, 150,000 guineas, so not an awful lot of profit there for the breeder who paid £125,000 for the stud fee, assuming they paid the fee and didn't have an arrangement. Ed, did you see him at the yearling sales? Why didn't you buy him?
I did see him at the yearling sales, and I actually really looked at my notes the other day, and I remember this horse very well. He was lot number 23, and he was sold by Flash Conroy from Glenvale Stud, and Flash horse does a very good job, and his yearlings horse look fantastic. And I actually liked this horse very much, but in all honesty, I sort of didn't pay a huge amount of attention for the simple reason that I didn't have any clients at the time who were going to be spending that kind of money. So when I go to book 1, which is the best yearling sale in Europe, I'm very much looking for sort of horses. I'm normally looking for horses under 100,000 as opposed to over 100,000. I'm looking to try and get a bargain, which, I mean, in hindsight, Eminent at 150,000 guineas probably does look like a bargain. This was a private sale, though. It wasn't not purchased in the ring. And full credit to Dermot Farrington, who does an incredibly good job in managing to buy him. But I must admit, I personally didn't have any clients for the horse, which is a great shame.
Now, I've got a 3-part question for you. Are you a true believer in Frankel? Obviously, the fact that you're sending or have sent Sky Lantern to him suggests you are. What do you think of the lady who wrote a letter to the Racing Post the other day who said that there's too much hype surrounding him? And what did you make of John Gosden's comments that there's a touch of wildness about his progeny?
I'm a massive believer in Frankel. I think he looks like he could be a brilliant stallion. I think the only trouble which he could have is the fact that it will probably be very difficult for him to sire a horse better than him. And so I also think a sign of a good stallion is when they sire progeny better than themselves, and this will be quite difficult for Frankel to achieve. But ultimately, I am a huge believer in him. Every day there appears to be another Frankel horse, a 3-year-old winning a maiden, and he obviously did incredibly well with his 2-year-old runners, particularly his stakes performers, considerably better, I believe, than Galileo did when he had his first 2-year-old runners. So yes, in answer to your first question, I think Frankel is a brilliant, potentially a brilliant stallion.
So not overhyped?
No, I don't think he really has been overhyped. I think he's achieved has done a lot with his 2-year-olds with his 2-year-olds last year, and looks like he's going to be doing a lot with his 3-year-olds this year. And frankly, I think the hype is a good thing. This is a stallion which managed to capture the public's imagination and has given our sport an outside interest, and I think it's fantastic, and I hope it continues.
No, I tend to agree, actually, and I think that letter was a symptom of tall poppy syndrome, in that people want to knock him now that he's at the top, I think, in his stallion career as well. And what about the wildness aspect? Have you noticed any of this, James, when you see his horses running?
Well, it's interesting you talk about wildness, because that sort of leads us nicely on to Dream Castle, who has just run the 2 races so far, looked a real world beater on debut and winning a fairly ordinary Doncaster maiden in the style of a potentially very exciting horse, and then finished second in the Green on his next outing when pulling far too hard for much of the race. I think one of the accusations that was levelled at Frankel's progeny when the first crop came through was that they don't look like him, and that they were very sort of mare dominant to the eye. And it seems like Dream Castle as a racehorse is very mare. He sort of followed his female line, and that he's another one out of a very fast female family. His dam Sandvikson only ran at 2 years old. She was very fast, won the Flying Childers. And yeah, so you talk about wildness. There certainly seems to be a touch of it in Dream Castle.
Mm.
Although it's interesting, just on the point of the public's perception of Frankel, it seems everyone sort of has their own opinion, don't they? Some people say they're not very attractive looking, or not quite as attractive as they might like. Some people say they stay very well. People talk about them being a bit hot and a bit kind of wild.
Mm.
Clearly they can run, and that's the kind of the bottom line for me. But it's just interesting how so many people have their own views and their own little takes on his progeny.
I suspect with Frankel, he's probably putting into his progeny a Rolls-Royce engine, but sometimes in a Morris Minor chassis. But maybe that's the mistake people made at the yearling sales first time round, but they won't be making that mistake again, will they? Dream Castle, Ed, you said you quite fancy this one in the race on Saturday?
Yes, I'm not a gambling man, but I must admit, if I was going to have a bet, I would be backing Dream Castle each way, just because I believe he's got a good price. What price is he?
I think it's about 16, 20 to 1, somewhere around
there. We go.
Sporting price.
£5 each way at 20 to 1. I just saw him in the paddock at Newbury, and I was very taken with him. I thought he was a lovely looking horse. And with 6 furlongs, with a furlong to go in the Greenham, it looked like Dream Castle was absolutely cruising.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then obviously Barney Roy came and picked him off. But I think the crucial thing to remember about these trials is that they are only trials, and I have no doubt that Dream Castle will improve. I also have no doubt that Barney Roy should improve. But I just think that at 20 to 1, he would be an interesting horse. As we say, he's by Frankel. He's out of a Dabawi mare. Dabawi, obviously, as we touched on earlier, being an outstanding stallion also. And again, if you look at this, it sort of continues the sending Galileo to fast mares theme. As you say, Sam Vixen, she was an incredibly fast mare. Beat the Colts in the Flying Childers, a Group 2 race over 5 furlongs. It's the same theory of sending the fast mares to Galileo. They're doing the same thing here with Frankel.
I think the plan as well with Dream Castle is to run him in a hood, which may help counter some of that wildness that we saw. For what it's worth, I think there's a chance that Dream Castle could easily end up being the best horse in the field. But what's interesting is that out of the principals anyway, he's the only one in the Guineas with an entry in the Commonwealth Cup, whereas a lot of the other, are looking sort of to step up and trip as the season progresses. It suggests that he's shown so much speed at home, they may think that his future lies over shorter rather than further.
Right.
You were saying there about Eminence being beaten in the Guineas trial, and not that I want to harp on about her because you've brought other good horses, but Sky Lantern was also beaten in the Guineas trial, wasn't she?
Yep, she was. She was beaten in the Nilgwyn.
And how distressed were you after that? Were you worried or?
That was cool as a cucumber.
You always are. Right. Eminence, Dream Castle we've covered. Now, I had a really good segue into Barney Roy because we'd just been talking about Galileo. And Galileo is a fantastic dam sire as well. He's been dam sire of 2 of the last Guineas winners, Night of Thunder and Galileo Gold last year. And Barney Roy is out of his daughter Alina by Excelebration. And there's another good link there because Excelebration was an old rival of Frankel's, often saw his backside in races. What do we think the pedigree and or form of Barney Roy?
First thing I'd just like to touch on is that, yes, you are right, Galileo is an incredibly good dam sire. But I also think the concept of being a top-class broodmare sire is needs to be taken at times with a slight pinch of salt, because I think what happens is that a stallion will cover the best fillies there are. So Galileo, for example, covers the best fillies, and so part of the reason why he is such a good broodmare sire is because he's covering their daughters and granddaughters of already incredibly good race fillies. So there already is normally a very good pedigree to back you up.
I accept that totally. The interesting thing actually so far is that Night of Thunder, Barney Roy and Galileo Gold, none of them would have been the most exceptional Galileo mares.
No,
they certainly
I agree
worked
with
on
that.
the track. And,
I mean, there is no denying that Galileo is a very good broodmare sire. It was just an observation.
You want him in a pedigree, really, don't you? On the top
yes,
or
you do.
What do you think of Acceleration as a sire?
He's beginning to really do quite well, and I think that first of all, people are much too quick to write off a stallion, and at the end of last year, people may have had a question mark over Acceleration, which is, how can you write off a stallion after he's just had one season of 2-year-old runners? And Acceleration himself, obviously, the older he got, the better he got, and it looks like a similar situation with his progeny.
Yeah, it's telling that Cornwall had to drop his fee to, I think, €10,000 this year. So, and what do you think? What did you make of Barney Roy in the Greenham?
I mean, he was obviously incredibly impressive, very eye-catching. He did it very well, did nothing wrong, and on the basis of that, obviously has a great chance in the Guineas. I obviously would be absolutely delighted if he did win. I'm a big fan of Richard Hannon, who does a fantastic job, and also Peter and Ross Doyle, who bought Barney Royal at, I think it was only £70,000 from the Doncaster Premier Yearling sale.
That would have been in your price range.
I clearly missed one there.
James, is this
I must actually have a look at the notes and see.
James, is this a Guineas winner's pedigree?
On the face of it, I'm going to have to say no, not really. I mean, it is a slightly thin first few generations there. I mean, the one thing he has really got in his favour, as you said, is the Galileo and the bottom line there. As long as it's in there somewhere, you've got some kind of chance. On form, I don't think Dreamcastle's got a hope of reversing Greenham form with Barney Roy. I think the way he lengthened, he clearly stayed on the better of the two, and they've obviously pulled a long way clear of the rest, which paints those two in particularly good light. Is it a Guineas winning pedigree? Well, obviously, given how new Acceleration is to the market, it's impossible to say what that really means at the moment. As Ed said, start of the year, it possibly wasn't firing in winners as many people would have hoped, but towards the back end, there was a good number of, autumn, early winter maiden winners that all looked fairly impressive, and I think this horse is one of them.
I think when you compare his pedigree to the likes of Eminent and Churchill and Rivet, etc., who all have exceptional pedigrees, I think, no, realistically, it is not a Guineas winning pedigree. But as I mentioned earlier, I don't think it's not all about the pedigree. There are other aspects, obviously, such as the physical aspect and everything like that, and the trainer, the jockey, all kinds of things. But on the face of it, it is not the most obvious pedigree. It's actually a family I know quite well, as I bought a filly called Peak Princess, who appears in the third generation of Barney Roy's family, and she is perfectly respectable, a 2-time 2-year-old winner, and we're hoping to get black type with her this year. But I just do remember when I bought her as a yearling, thinking, you are the pedigree, in the sense that she's going to need to get black type to make the pedigree look respectable, because it is not a very good pedigree. There are, I think, in 3 generations, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 horses in 3 generations, and now Barney Roy 5. That's 5 black type horses, of which only 1, 2, 3 of them are big black type horses, so it's not particularly exciting.
Okay. Now, we must move on quickly because you've been going on about buying Skylanson for so much. We must go on to Albuquerque, whose form looks beyond reproach because he beat National Defence quite nicely in the Jebel. Is his pedigree also unimpeachable?
He is by a stallion called Dream Ahead, who, until Albuquerque appeared on the scene, I think people wouldn't have necessarily regarded Dream Ahead as a particularly commercial prospect. But obviously Albuquerque looks incredibly good, and particularly for Andre Fabre to bring a horse over. I think there's an article in today's Racing Post about Andre Fabre's previous record in the Guineas, and it is outstanding to say the least. And then with regard to Albuquerque's pedigree, it actually goes back. The female family is actually quite impressive. The second dam, Carolina, was a top-class filly in France. She won the French Oaks, and there are plenty of other good horses on the page.
James, you said this was your pick for the Guineas.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to touch on is if 12 months ago, none of us would imagine would have been sat here talking about a Son of Dream Ahead, I don't think, for the Guineas, but I think that just sort of goes to highlight the fact that good horses can come from anywhere, and as Ed said, it kind of doesn't really matter what their pedigree is if the physical doesn't match up to it, or the physical model can. And
I think every stallion is capable of getting one good horse.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then just among the other runners for the Guineas, you've got Lancaster Bomber, who's a Warfront half-brother to Celebration, who we've just been talking about. Larchmont Lad is by Footsteps in the Sand, out of a mare by King's Best, so has 2 Guineas winners close up in his pedigree. Anything else you think worthy of mentioning the other runners?
I think it probably concerns the one we've touched on, really. I mean, it's been an interesting year in the fact there's so much. We haven't seen the favourite for a long time, but the trials have actually added a real bit of spark to this year's renewal, I think, with Barney Roy and Eminent and Albuquerque.
OK, we'll be back with the 1,000 Guineas in a minute.
Thanks for downloading the Racing Postcast. Listen online and on mobile.
On to the 1,000 Guineas. Rhododendron is a pretty short price favourite, having won the Fillies Mile so impressively last year. And rather boringly, she's another very well-bred Galileo, so we won't be able to pick too many holes in her pedigree. She's out of Halfway to Heaven, who I always thought was quite amusing because she's by Pivotal, who is best over 5 furlongs, out of Cassandra Go, who is best over 5 furlongs, and she managed to win over 10 furlongs in the Nassau Stakes. Rhododendron, is she a good thing?
I mean, on her previous form, she obviously she's not dissimilar to Churchill. She's very, very hard to grab. She's got exceptional two-year-old form, and obviously on top of that, as you've mentioned, she's got an incredibly good pedigree. There's sort of very little to say in the sense that she is quite simply beautifully bred and has very, very good form. She clearly has an outstanding chance.
Yeah, and Galileo's side last year's 1,000 Guineas 1, 2, 3. There isn't really much more to say, is there?
She's out of a Pivotal mare, and he's emerging as a very good broodmare sire.
You literally just said you don't believe in broodmare sires.
Okay, edit that. But it is quite interesting.
Yeah.
I don't not believe in them. It was just an observation.
Yeah, actually, Hydrangea, who she beat in the Fillies Mile, is also out of a Pivotal mare. Beauteous Truth.
What's your favourite flower, rhododendron or hydrangea?
I'm not sure I'd know the difference if I had two presented to me.
There we go. That's something for you to do a bit of research on.
Yeah. Daban has a more interesting pedigree. Do you say Daban or Daban or... No? We'll go with Daban then. Because she's by Acclamation, who's been around for a long time now. I think it's about 2008, his champion first season as a sire. And he hasn't so far really shown too much that he's a classic sire. He's an outstanding source of fast and precocious performers. But Daban would really be his first to make any significant impact in a classic in Britain or Ireland, I'm pretty sure of. Do you think Acclamation can do it? Either of you?
He's, as you say, he doesn't obviously jump out as a classic stallion. He's certainly an incredibly good stallion and has done very well. Last year, he obviously had a very good 2-year-old Memas, and this year he obviously already has Daban. And there's no reason why he shouldn't be capable of siring a classic winner. He himself was a sprinter, but he is certainly capable of getting horses which stay a mile. So I don't see why not. This filly Daban has an incredibly good pedigree. She's out of a whipper mare, and there's endless black type horses on the page, including Chartreuse, who recently sold at last year's December sales for 825,000. I mean, Daban has every chance, and I sincerely hope that this horse does win. First of all, she was bought by a good friend of mine, Richard Brown, who does a fantastic job and has done an incredibly good job for the owner of this filly, who appears to be emerging as a
Major force.
A major force, exactly. And also, I'd like to see Daban win, because I think it's always good to have a stallion like Acclamation have a Group 1 winner. Not a Group 1 winner, but a classic winner. Like last year, we saw Paco Boy having a classic winner, because otherwise, frankly, it does just become Galileo, Dabawi, Galileo, and so on.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I guess if Acclamation's ever going to do it, Daban has the pedigree to make it happen, doesn't she? She's half sisters Thick Riat, family of Johnny Barnes, who was also by
Acclamation. Yeah.
And further back, it's the family of Most Improved and Ecto, two very good horses. James, were you impressed by her run?
Yeah, I mean, I think you would sort of be hard pressed not to be taken by it. I suppose the big question over her is stamina. Is Acclamation going to have a horse who is at her absolute best, which she's going to have to be to win a classic over a mile? The thing that's kind of put her 2 races to bed so far has been her turn of foot. Now, whether that'll be quite so potent over a truly run mile against horses with, slightly more stamina-laden pedigrees like Rhododendron, Hydrangea, I'm not 100% convinced.
I would agree with that. She's not bred to stay.
Yeah.
On the basic, on the basic fact, she's not really bred to stay. But we will find out.
What about Fair Eva? There seems to be a bit more renewed confidence in her in the last few weeks. She dazzled at Ascot last year, but then disappointed at odds-on in the Lowther Stakes and the Rockfall. She's by Frankel, again, out of the Haydock Sprint Cup winner African Rose. Can we forgive her for those iffy runs last year? Well, I say iffy, but obviously they're in group company.
I was about to say, I think the second in the Rockfell, which was to Spainberg, if I'm not mistaken, probably wasn't quite as disappointing as it may have looked at the time. I know she was a very short price, but I don't think that's necessarily the be-all and end-all. Yeah, I think she's got a very good chance. I mean, outside of the Galileo mares, she'd be the one I'd be looking at with the most sort of serious claims.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think she obviously has a very good chance. Roger Charlton does an incredibly good job. He's never massively hard, I think, on his 2-year-olds, so there's every reason to think that hopefully this filly should improve at 3. And just as this podcast, I believe, or postcast as you call it, is, I believe, meant to be based on pedigrees, here's another filly which, similar to the Frankel horse we were talking about, Dream Castle, here is another Frankel who is out of an incredibly fast mare. And we're going back to the theme of sending the Galileo line horses to incredibly fast mares. So I think that's 3-4 of them we've now seen.
Yeah.
I mean, African Rose was a Group 1 winning sprinter.
Now, going by pedigree, surely the best pedigree in the race belongs to Talayeb, the once raced maiden winner, by Dansili, out of Ramush, who was by Rahi. She's a half-sister to Muntazar, who was third in the Royal Lodge Stakes. Ramush, the dam, was 7th in the 1,000 Guineas, third in the Oaks. She was a half-sister to Ganati, who interestingly won the 1,000 Guineas, having only won a maiden as well. And Mawathiq, who was second in the Champion Stakes. Ramush, in turn, was out of Sarayir, who was 9th to Sleepy Time in the Guineas and won the Oh So Sharp Stakes. And Sarayir is out of Talayeb's owner, Sheikh Hamdan's amazing broodmare, Height of Fashion, who produced Nashwan, who won the 2,000 Guineas, Naif, Unforwain, etc. The best bred?
The pedigree is exceptional. It really is a fantastic pedigree. And although I don't know a huge amount about this filly's, about her maiden win, I know that she did do it at Newmarket, which obviously Newmarket maidens are always generally regarded as above average maidens.
This one didn't actually work out that well, I don't think. The second and third have not won since, but she did win as she liked.
She did win, and she was interestingly a 10-1 shot, which is suggestive that she wasn't that fancied. But the bottom line is, I don't think you can ever really knock an unbeaten horse, because an unbeaten horse quite simply is unbeaten. And I think when Sheikh Hamdan won the Guineas with Ganati, who, as you say, is closely related to this filly, I believe that Ganati won the Guineas on the back of just a maiden win.
She did, yep.
I think the in-running comments as well recorded that when she won her maiden, she actually struck into herself as well. So if she's capable of winning a Newmarket maiden by a couple of lengths, as she likes, having struck into herself, who knows what she's capable of.
Well,
if she,
there we go. It looks like we've discovered the 1,000 Guineas winner, and we're all going to have lunch now.
Yeah. Not quite. Hold on.
Dansili, I should mention, he is a stallion who has been a brilliant stallion for a horse who, although he was an incredibly good racehorse, he never actually won a Group 1 race. But he, talking about pedigrees, probably is one of the best bred horses. Again, you look at these blue hen mares, and I think that Hassili, the dam of Dansili, was certainly one of them. Height of Fashion, who we touched on earlier, and also Urban Sea, the dam of Galileo. But there are all these exceptional broodmares, and so Talayeb is by Dansili. So not only is she beautifully bred on her female side, but also if you look at her split pedigree, she's got some pretty impressive...
And Dansili has 1,000 Guineas winner on his record already, who was Miss France, exactly.
Of course.
And
he had a Breeders' Cup winner last year.
He did.
Called?
It was the Juddmonte filly.
No, it wasn't.
Cheveley Park filly, beg your pardon.
Queen's
Trust.
Can't get the staff nowadays.
We won't be doing a pub quiz anytime soon, will we? There's also Hydrangea, who we touched upon earlier in the Guineas. She's out of Beauty's Truth. She was second in the Fillies Mile. She's a sister to an Australian Group 1 winner over 10 furlongs, the United States. Intricately, who is by Fastnet Rock out of a Galileo mare, which is an interesting cross these days. Also
intricately, we should point out, is a 3-part sister. Well, no, she's not quite that, but her dam is a half-sister to Rock of Gibraltar, who was by Danehill, and Fastnet Rock is by Danehill, so she is certainly very closely related to Rock of Gibraltar, who himself was a Guineas winner, albeit the Irish Guineas.
No.
And the English Guineas.
English Guineas, yeah.
Yes, he won the beat Hawkwing, didn't he?
Yes, on different sides of the track.
Yes.
Any others worthy of mention before we go for lunch?
I think we've covered all the...
Yeah. Yeah, let's
I
do it.
can guarantee that out of all the horses we've talked about, that the 2000 will be won by a horse we haven't mentioned, and the 1000 will be won by a horse we haven't mentioned.
Yeah, well, that's the way to get listeners tuning into our next podcast. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for coming to the Racing Post Towers in London. And thank you, James. And we'll probably reconvene for the Derby and Oaks.
Thanks for downloading the Racing Postcast. Listen online and on mobile.